Nurse Christina Riggs, convicted of smothering her 2 young children to death in 1997.
I normally reached out and told somebody what I was feeling or thinking.
At 9:09 p.m. on May 2, 2000, Christina Marie Riggs closed her eyes for the final time. Just moments before the lethal injection took effect, this registered nurse and mother of 2 had whispered her last words to the witnesses gathered in that sterile Arkansas execution chamber. But how does a woman trained to save lives become the one who takes them? How does a mother become her own children's executioner? The answer lies in a story so disturbing, so unthinkable, that even seasoned investigators struggled to comprehend it. On a quiet November night in 1997, Christina made a decision that would shatter 2 innocent lives and land her on death row as one of the few women in modern American history to face execution. This is a mother's ultimate betrayal, the thin line between desperation and evil, and the final moments of a woman who destroyed everything she was supposed to protect. What drove Christina Marie Riggs to kill her own children? And in her final moments, did she find redemption or remain unrepentant? This is her story, from the quiet desperation that led to unthinkable violence, to the sterile chamber where justice was finally served. To understand the woman who would commit the unthinkable, we must first understand who Christina Marie Riggs was before that November night changed everything. Born in 1971 in Arkansas, Christina grew up in what appeared to be an ordinary American family. She was intelligent, determined, and driven by a desire to help others. That drive led her to nursing school, where she excelled in her studies and embraced a profession built on healing and compassion. By her mid-20s, Christina had carved out what seemed like a respectable life. She worked as a registered nurse, a job that demanded precision, empathy, and an unwavering commitment to preserving life. Her colleagues knew her as competent and caring, someone who understood the weight of holding others' lives in her hands. She was trained to recognize signs of distress, to act quickly in emergencies, to be a guardian against suffering and death. But behind the professional facade, Christina's personal life was unraveling. She was a single mother raising 2 young children, 5-year-old Justin and 2-year-old Shelby. Justin was a bright, energetic boy who loved dinosaurs and building blocks. Shelby was still a toddler, full of giggles and wonder, completely dependent on her mother's love and protection. To the outside world, Christina appeared to be managing well, juggling her demanding career with the challenges of single parenthood. The reality was far different. Financial pressures mounted with each passing month. The cost of childcare, medical bills, and daily expenses stretched her nurse's salary to its breaking point. Single motherhood in the 1990s came with limited support systems and constant judgment. Christina felt the weight of providing for her children while maintaining her professional responsibilities. She was drowning, but like so many struggling parents, she kept her head above water through sheer determination and an unwillingness to admit defeat. Friends and family would later describe a woman who seemed increasingly overwhelmed but refused to ask for help. Christina had always been independent, perhaps too independent. She carried the burden of her struggles alone, creating a carefully constructed image of competence while battling desperation behind closed doors. Her children were her world, but they were also her constant reminder of responsibilities she felt increasingly unable to meet. The financial strain was crushing. Bills piled up. Credit cards reached their limits. The fear of losing her home, of being unable to provide for Justin and Shelby, consumed her thoughts. She worked extra shifts when possible, but the demands of single parenthood made it difficult to take on additional hours. Every dollar was accounted for, every expense calculated, yet it never seemed to be enough. What made Christina's situation particularly tragic was how isolated she had become. The very independence that had driven her to succeed as a nurse now prevented her from reaching out when she needed help most. She wore her struggles like armor, protecting others from seeing her vulnerability while slowly suffocating under the weight of her circumstances. In the quiet moments after her children went to bed, Christina would sit alone and contemplate solutions that seemed increasingly desperate. She loved Justin and Shelby with a fierce intensity that should have been their protection. Instead, in her fractured thinking, it would become the justification for the unthinkable. The woman trained to preserve life was slowly convincing herself that taking it might be the only way to save her children from a future she believed she couldn't provide. But in the fall of 1997, neighbors still saw Christina Riggs as simply another working mother doing her best. They had no way of knowing that behind her tired smile lay the mind of someone who was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. Rent payments were behind. Utility companies issued disconnection notices. The refrigerator grew increasingly bare as grocery money disappeared into the bottomless pit of overdue expenses. Each day brought new reminders of her failing ability to provide the life she believed Justin and Shelby deserved. The isolation that had always characterized Christina's approach to problems now became her prison. Pride prevented her from reaching out to family members who might have offered assistance. Professional obligations demanded she maintain the composed facade expected of a healthcare provider. She attended work shifts, administered medications, comforted patients, and provided the healing touch that defined her profession, all while battling the growing conviction that she was failing at the most important job of her life, being a mother. It was during this period of overwhelming despair that Christina began to fixate on what she perceived as a solution to her children's suffering. Like many struggling parents, she had maintained life insurance policies on Justin and Shelby, modest coverage meant to provide security should the unthinkable occur. But in Christina's deteriorating mental state, these policies began to represent something far more sinister, a way to ensure her children would never experience the poverty and hardship that haunted her nightmares. The transformation of a protective financial tool into an instrument of tragedy reflected the profound distortion occurring within Christina's thinking. The same analytical skills that made her an effective nurse now worked against her, calculating cold equations where love should have provided warmth. She convinced herself that her children's debts would spare them from a life of want, that the insurance money would somehow retroactively provide the security she could never give them while they lived. November 4, 1997, arrived with no fanfare, no warning signs that would alert neighbors or colleagues to the horror about to unfold. Christina returned home from her nursing shift to the small house she shared with 5-year-old Justin and 2-year-old Shelby. The evening routine proceeded as it had countless times before: dinner, baths, bedtime stories. But this night carried the weight of finality that only Christina understood. The details of what transpired in those quiet hours remain almost too horrific to comprehend. Using her medical knowledge, Christina administered fatal doses of medication to both children as they slept. Justin and Shelby, trusting completely in their mother's love, never knew that the hands that had soothed their fevers and bandaged their scraped knees were now ending their lives. The woman trained to recognize and prevent suffering instead became its deliberate architect. After confirming that both children were dead, Christina attempted to take her own life, unable to face a world in which she had destroyed everything she claimed to love. Her suicide attempt failed, leaving her alive to face the consequences of her actions. It was Christina herself who called emergency services the following morning, reporting the deaths in a voice that witnesses would later describe as eerily calm. When paramedics and police arrived at the scene, they found a tableau of unimaginable tragedy: 2 innocent children dead in their beds, and a mother whose misguided love had transformed into the ultimate betrayal. The woman who had sworn to do no harm had violated the most sacred trust in human existence, the bond between mother and child. The breaking point had been reached, and in its aftermath lay the shattered remains of a family that would never find redemption. The emergency call that came into Sherwood Police Department on the morning of November 5, 1997, would forever be etched in the memory of the responding officers. Christina Riggs' voice on the recording carried an unsettling flatness as she reported that her children were not breathing. What began as what appeared to be a tragic medical emergency would quickly transform into one of Arkansas's most disturbing criminal investigations. When paramedics and police arrived at the modest home on Stanfield Drive, they encountered a scene that defied immediate comprehension. 5-year-old Justin and 2-year-old Shelby lay peacefully in their beds, appearing as though they were simply in deep sleep. There were no obvious signs of trauma, no evidence of struggle or violence. The children looked serene, almost angelic, which made the reality of their deaths all the more chilling. Christina herself presented investigators with their first puzzle. Found unconscious in her bedroom, she had clearly attempted suicide through a deliberate overdose of medications. The same medical knowledge that had enabled her to end her children's lives efficiently had failed to achieve her own death. As she was rushed to Baptist Medical Center, detectives began the grim work of processing what they were increasingly certain was a crime scene rather than a tragic accident. The initial investigation revealed troubling inconsistencies that immediately raised suspicions. The home showed no signs of forced entry, no evidence of any external threat that might have harmed the children. Their peaceful positioning in bed suggested they had died while sleeping, but the absence of any apparent natural cause of death prompted investigators to treat the scene as a potential homicide from the earliest hours. Evidence collection proceeded with meticulous care. Investigators documented every detail of the children's bedrooms, photographed their positions, and collected samples for toxicological analysis. The medicine cabinet revealed a telling inventory of prescription medications, many of which were accessible through Christina's position as a registered nurse. Syringes and medical supplies found throughout the home painted a picture of someone with both the knowledge and means to administer lethal doses of controlled substances. While forensic technicians worked to uncover the physical evidence, Christina remained hospitalized under police guard. Her recovery from the suicide attempt was complicated by her continued refusal to eat or cooperate with medical staff. The woman who had spent her career caring for others now rejected all attempts at care, seemingly determined to complete what she had started. The breakthrough came when Christina finally began to speak. In a series of interviews that left seasoned investigators visibly shaken, she provided a detailed confession that removed any doubt about what had occurred. With the same clinical precision she had once used to document patient care, Christina described how she had used her medical expertise to calculate and administer fatal doses of potassium chloride and other medications to both children. Her confession revealed the calculated nature of her actions. This was not a moment of sudden rage or temporary insanity, but a deliberate plan executed with professional competence. She described waiting to ensure both children were deeply asleep before beginning the process that would end their lives. The methodical way she recounted these details horrified investigators who had witnessed countless crimes but never encountered a mother who could so coldly describe murdering her own children. The public reaction was swift and visceral. News of the murders sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. The image of a trusted healthcare professional, someone trained to preserve life, using that very training to destroy her own children, challenged fundamental assumptions about maternal love and professional ethics. Media coverage struggled to comprehend how such a betrayal could occur, with headlines attempting to capture the incomprehensible nature of the crime. As Christina was formally charged with capital murder, the investigation revealed the full scope of a tragedy that would haunt everyone involved. 2 innocent lives had been lost, a community's sense of safety shattered, and justice now demanded answers that might never fully explain the unthinkable. The courtroom in Pulaski County buzzed with tension as the trial of Christina Marie Riggs commenced in March 1999. The case had drawn national attention, not merely for its horrific nature, but for the profound questions it raised about maternal love, mental illness, and the limits of human understanding. Judge David Burnett presided over proceedings that would determine whether a mother who killed her children deserved life imprisonment or death. The prosecution, led by Deputy Prosecutor John Johnson, presented their case with methodical precision. Their strategy was straightforward: demonstrate that Christina's actions constituted premeditated capital murder deserving of the ultimate penalty. The evidence they presented painted a chilling portrait of calculated killing. Toxicology reports confirmed that both children had died from lethal injections of potassium chloride, administered with the expertise of someone intimately familiar with medical procedures. Prosecutors emphasized Christina's nursing background as evidence of premeditation rather than mitigation. They argued that her medical training made her uniquely capable of understanding exactly what she was doing when she prepared those fatal injections. The procurement of the potassium chloride, the careful calculation of dosages, and the methodical administration to sleeping children all pointed to deliberate, planned murder rather than a spontaneous act of desperation. The testimony of medical examiner Dr. Charles Coates proved particularly damning. His detailed explanation of how potassium chloride causes cardiac arrest, delivered in clinical language that echoed Christina's own medical training, underscored the prosecution's argument that these were not the actions of someone temporarily insane, but of someone who knew precisely how to kill efficiently and quietly. The defense, however, faced an almost impossible task. Attorney Pam Buchanan knew that she could not dispute the facts of what had occurred. Christina's own confession had eliminated any possibility of claiming innocence. Instead, the defense strategy centered on portraying Christina as a woman driven to desperate acts by severe mental illness and overwhelming circumstances. Buchanan presented testimony from mental health professionals who had evaluated Christina, painting a picture of a woman suffering from severe depression and other psychological disorders that had warped her perception of reality. The defense argued that Christina's belief that killing her children would somehow save them from a life of poverty and suffering represented a form of psychotic thinking that rendered her incapable of forming the specific intent required for capital murder. The courtroom heard testimony about Christina's deteriorating financial situation, her isolation, and the mounting pressures that had consumed her life in the months leading up to the murders. Defense witnesses described a woman who had become increasingly withdrawn and who had developed an obsessive fear that her children would suffer if she could not provide for them adequately. Perhaps most poignantly, the defense presented evidence of Christina's genuine love for her children. Photographs, letters, and testimony from those who knew the family revealed a mother who had been devoted to Justin and Shelby, making her actions all the more inexplicable and tragic. The defense argued that only someone suffering from severe mental illness could transform such love into such devastating violence. The prosecution countered each defense argument with relentless logic. They pointed out that Christina had functioned normally at work, maintaining her professional responsibilities even as she planned her children's deaths. Her ability to carry out complex medical procedures and maintain relationships with colleagues demonstrated that she retained the capacity to distinguish right from wrong. After days of testimony that left spectators and jurors visibly shaken, the case went to deliberation. The jury faced the agonizing task of determining not just Christina's guilt, which was never in question, but whether her actions warranted death or life imprisonment. The verdict came after less than 3 hours of deliberation: guilty of capital murder. The penalty phase that followed required the same jury to decide Christina's fate. On May 11, 1999, they returned with their decision: death by lethal injection. The woman who had used her medical knowledge to kill would face execution by the very method she had employed against her own children. The Arkansas Women's Unit became Christina Riggs' final home following her death sentence. As one of only a handful of women on death row in the state's history, she occupied a solitary existence that mirrored the isolation she had felt during those final months before the murders. The institutional routine of prison life, measured meals, regulated exercise, monitored communications, provided a stark contrast to the chaos that had consumed her civilian existence. Christina's time on death row was marked by an unusual characteristic: her apparent acceptance of her fate. Unlike many condemned prisoners who exhaust every legal avenue, Christina showed little interest in prolonged appeals. Her attorneys filed the mandatory appeals required by law, challenging various aspects of her trial and sentencing, but Christina herself seemed resigned to the outcome. She had, in many ways, intended to die alongside her children that November night, and the state's death sentence merely postponed what she had already decided for herself. The appeals process moved through predictable channels. Her lawyers argued that the trial court had erred in various rulings, that her mental illness had not been adequately considered, and that the death penalty itself was disproportionate. The Arkansas Supreme Court upheld her conviction and sentence in a detailed opinion that acknowledged the tragedy while affirming the legal soundness of the proceedings. Federal appeals followed, each met with the same result. The courts found no reversible error significant enough to overturn either her conviction or her death sentence. Throughout this legal process, Christina granted several interviews that provided disturbing insights into her state of mind. Speaking with journalists and documentary filmmakers, she remained eerily matter-of-fact about her actions. She expressed no conventional remorse, instead maintaining that she had acted out of love to spare her children from suffering. This unwavering justification of her actions troubled even those who opposed the death penalty, as it suggested either profound mental illness or a complete absence of genuine remorse. In one particularly chilling interview, Christina stated that if given the chance, she might make the same decision again. This statement, more than any other evidence, seemed to confirm the prosecution's argument that she posed a continued danger and that rehabilitation was impossible. Her words haunted those who heard them, raising uncomfortable questions about the nature of evil and the possibility of redemption. As her execution date approached in the spring of 2000, Christina made few special requests. Her final meal was notably simple: a cheeseburger, strawberry banana cake, and a Diet Dr. Pepper. The modesty of this request stood in stark contrast to the enormity of her crimes, reflecting perhaps the ordinary humanity that still existed within someone who had committed extraordinary evil. May 2, 2000, dawned gray and humid in Arkansas. Christina spent her final hours in the death house adjacent to the execution chamber, visited by a chaplain and her remaining legal counsel. She declined to make any final public statement beyond what she had already expressed in interviews. There were no dramatic last-minute appeals, no stays of execution, no final gestures toward the families affected by her actions. At 9 p.m., Christina was escorted into the execution chamber and secured to the gurney. The process proceeded with clinical efficiency, a grim irony given her medical background. As the witnesses gathered behind the glass partition, including representatives of the media and victim advocates, Christina closed her eyes. Her final words, whispered to the chaplain beside her, were reportedly a simple prayer. The lethal injection began at 9:09 p.m. Within minutes, the woman who had used her knowledge of medicine to take life had her own life ended by the same principles she had once sworn to uphold. Christina Marie Riggs was pronounced dead at 9:19 p.m., becoming one of the few women executed in the United States since the reinstatement of capital punishment. The execution brought no sense of closure to a case that had challenged fundamental assumptions about motherhood, mental illness, and justice. 2 children remained forever lost, their potential unrealized, their brief lives ended by the person who should have protected them above all others. The execution of Christina Marie Riggs closed a chapter that had horrified a nation, but the questions it raised remain as haunting today as they were in 2000. 2 innocent children, Justin, 5, and Shelby, 2, lost their lives to the very person entrusted with their protection. Their mother, consumed by desperation and distorted thinking, paid with her own life for crimes that defied comprehension. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the intersection of mental illness, poverty, and parental responsibility. Could different support systems have prevented this tragedy? Were there warning signs that went unrecognized? The answers remain elusive, buried with the victims of a love that became fatally twisted. Some tragedies transcend explanation, leaving only grief and the enduring question of whether such darkness could have been prevented.